prepare yourself for the infusion of positive energy into the lives of single.
And welcome back, peeps. Another wonderful, splendid, joyous episode of Join the Journey Radio, where we still have technical difficulties. I I don't know what to say, peeps. I mean, the tech people, they're just like, you got to show us your files. They're convinced there's something's wrong with my files, but there's nothing wrong with my files because I play them on my own player outside of their system, and I don't have any issues. But every time I play, it doesn't matter what I play, every single video that I play through their system has this issue where it just seizes up at the end. So I'm just like, that sounds to me like it's your system that's the problem, but they won't admit that. So apologies, peeps. Still trying to work through all of that. But here we are in the JJ Zone for another wonderful, splendiferous, joyous episode of Join the Journey Radio. This is episode number 335. And the title for this episode is Get Ready Now. I didn't actually I'm not trying to go out of my way to talk about emergency preparedness. And certainly it's not a topic that a lot of singles gravitate to. But when I was making out the schedule earlier in the year, I just felt really strongly like for the program for this week, I needed to talk about emergency preparedness. And I don't know why that prompting came to me, but I don't have to know why a prompting comes in order to follow it. So I'm just going to follow it and trust that the Lord knows what He's doing. Um, I certainly think it's an apropos topic because, I mean, when you consider all the craziness that's going on in the world today, not just here in my own country, the United States, but globally, there's a lot of commotion. And as you read in the scriptures, men's hearts are starting to fail them. Many men's hearts have already failed them a long, long time ago. So there's a lot of chaos in the world, a lot of unpredictability. And it really behooves each one of us to think about what might happen and be prepared. Now, I want to emphasize the term might happen. Okay, I'm not here to peddle any conspiracy theory. I'm not here to tell you about what's going on behind the scenes of this or that. I'm not saying that anything undesirable is going to happen. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to think about what could happen and be prepared for what may take place. And certainly when you see all the chaos in the world today, there's a lot that could happen. We talk about emergency preparedness within the church. We're typically talking about, having enough food and money and other resources saved up so that you can survive an unforeseen event like the loss of a job or a natural disaster or who knows what's going to happen. And certainly, there's a lot of people who, were caught unprepared when COVID came. I'm sure that all of us remember, the people that very few people who actually had toilet paper. And I still remember seeing, ads for $200 a roll. And, people get dependent on the supply chains, which, COVID and the pandemic showed us are very fragile and really not dependable. And so we need to think about how we can depend upon our own selves and be prepared and store up for what may happen. I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying anything will happen. I'm just saying something may happen. And certainly those of us who are single, this is just one more thing we have to take care of, right? Because we have to take care of everything in our lives because we're all by our lonesome, right? We're living it on our own. So now some of us are single parents raising children. And so you have an even larger burden to prepare. But, um, my purpose in the program today is to talk about ways in which, you know, Latter-day Saint singles can actually embrace this concept, specifically for them and their situation. Certainly, I don't think. I don't think that a single adult's going to prepare for an emergency crisis situation the same way that a married couple with a family is going to prepare for them. So we're going to talk about that today. I also have a couple of announcements. One I'm going to make now, which is you'll notice there's no microphone here. There's a little snafu with that. So uh, as I mentioned last week, I was at the conference there in the DC area, and I don't know how this happened because I don't know. I actually left my microphone at the hotel. So earlier today, I'm scrounging around looking for this microphone, and it's like I know I had it, and it wasn't in any of the bags that I packed. It wasn't where I thought it would be, where I normally put it when I'm not using it. And so I came to the conclusion, it's like I must have left it in the hotel. And instantly I thought, no, there's no way that happened. Because this thing's got a little bit of bulk to it. It's like I always look around the room to make sure I got everything before I leave a hotel. That's just my habit, my practice. I'm like, there's no way. It's like, how could I have not seen that? Because it's got a little bit of size and bulk to it. But the more I kept looking around, on my end, it's like it's not here, dude. So I looked up the phone number for the hotel. I called them up, and it didn't take long for them to get contacted with their lost and found. So, oh yeah, we got your microphone here. So I gotta go back. I gotta go back to go get it. Which, of course, I haven't. I wasn't doing that today. I thought about maybe doing it, but I had other stuff I wanted to get to. So didn't get to it today. We'll get to it tomorrow. So next week, when we come back for another splendiferous, joyous episode of Join the Journey Radio, you'll see me here with my grand microphone. But today, we're just gonna, kind of wing it with what we got here. So apologies if the audio doesn't come out as it normally does. So that's the first announcement. The second announcement, I'll tell you more about at the end. Hopefully, we have time for it. I want to provide some feedback for the conference, just my perspective on how things went, what was going on, and just kind of give you my feedback about it. I don't want to give you any spoilers, but I will say that longtime listeners of the program understand that anything mid singles in me just never really clicked, and I had a slightly different view of what was going on from this past weekend. So we'll try to fit that in there at the end of the program. But first, let's dig into the main topic here about um, emergency preparedness. And that hasn't really been. I mean, I can remember growing up hearing general authorities talk about this all the time. And then, it seems like, the last 10, 15 years or so, there hasn't really been that much. It comes up once in a while, but the frequency with which the general authorities have been talking about this topic has certainly gone down. Now some have interpreted that to mean that must not be that important, but you may remember, as I did, Elder Bednar, in the October 2020 General Conference. So here we are, in the midst of this pandemic. He had a few things to say about emergency preparedness. So let's see if we can pull up first quote here. Hopefully this plays right.
Afternoon, a few months ago, Susan and I inventoried our food storage and emergency supplies. At the time, COVID-19 was spreading rapidly, and a series of earthquakes had jolted our home in Utah. We have worked since the earliest days of our marriage to follow prophetic counsel about preparing for unforeseen challenges. So examining our state of readiness in the midst of the virus and earthquakes seemed like a good and timely thing to do. We wanted to find out our grades on these unannounced tests. We learned a great deal. In many areas, our preparatory work was just right. In some other areas, however, improvement was necessary because we
got this issue again. So anyway, I really got to get on these tech guys because this is just really, really annoying. So oh gosh, here we go again. One thing after the next, huh? Anyone remember what things were like before technology was such a huge part of our lives? Anywho, the end of the quote says, we learned a great deal in many areas of preparatory work was just right. In some other areas, however, improvement was necessary because we had not recognized and addressed particular needs in timely ways. And then he goes on to talk about, food storage and how some of the food that he had stored up was because it was just sitting there, right? And he just didn't go into it, that some of the food he had stored up was actually starting to rot. So he had to, do something to get rid of that. So let's dig into what he had to say next.
church members opine that emergency plans and supplies, food storage, and 72-hour kits must not be important anymore because the brethren have not spoken recently and extensively about these and related topics in general conference. But repeated admonitions to prepare have been proclaimed by leaders of the church for decades. The consistency of prophetic counsel over time creates a powerful concert of clarity and a warning volume.
Here we go again. So he's saying the consistency of prophetic counsel over time creates a powerful concert of clarity and a warning volume far louder than solo performances can ever produce. And that's, I think that gets to the crux of the matter. That just because the general authorities haven't been talking a lot about it doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about it. And I know that there's a lot of things that, for us as Singularity Saints are in our world that are taking a much higher place than thinking about, planning for some emergency that may or may not happen. But I'm here to tell you all the chaos that's in the world today. It shouldn't take much to convince you that we need to take a serious look at being prepared for what might happen. I'm not saying anything will happen. And I certainly hope and pray that nothing, really awful happens. But the possibility is there. And given all the chaos that we see in the world today, the probability is actually pretty high. And so it behooves us to think about these things because I guarantee you it's going to be far better for each one of us if we prepare for something that may happen and it turns out it doesn't happen. It's going to be a far better situation to be in than not to prepare and then something actually does happen. That's the situation you don't want to be in. So I think we really need to just, settle down and figure out, how do we appropriate this? Now, of course, um, Elder Bednar was right. There hasn't been a whole lot of talk lately about emergency plans and food storage and whatnot. So I went doing a little bit of research there on the church website. There's a great web page. If you go into the gospel library, and there's like different topics that you can study. One of the topics is emergency preparedness. I highly recommend you go there. I'll try to put a link to the page in the description for the video, so you can actually go there yourself and read up on what it actually talks about there. I think when it comes to emergency preparedness for singles, and I know this has worked well for me, is like the general principle is to store up on food that you're already eating. And to get it used to be, back when I was a kid, church was teaching people to save up for a year's worth of some food, but now the counsel is 3 months. So look for 3 months of food, water. Let me tell you something. You're gonna go through water like no other, because water. Think about all the different things you use water for. So, and my approach to it has always been, well, there's the approach I've always taken, and then recently I've kind of added on to it. So the approach I've always taken has been just take the things that you normally buy and just buy a little bit more. If I have, a little bit of surplus, which I know is really hard these days with, inflation, to buy a little bit more. But if you can afford it, buy a little bit more of what you're already buying. So if I go to the store and I'm buying, say, a can of green beans, and I only need 1 can or 2 cans, let's say I need 2 cans, then it's like, do I have enough to buy a 3rd can that I can just put away? And then, because you just buy what you're already eating, right? The key part with that, though, is that you've got to rotate stuff out. And the food that you normally buy in the store, that's in, packaged in cans or whatever, typically is not going to last more than a year or two out in the future. So you really do need to, rotate through your store. And that what leads me to the second avenue. So I actually got started into buying these free-dried meals. So I have an example of one here. So I'm not getting any kickbacks. So don't consider this like an advertisement for a product. I'm just showing you what I buy. So I buy these like meals like this, and the thing I love, so many things I love about this. One, these things will last for 30 years. So there's not as much pressure on me to rotate stuff out, right? I can take it as I need it. Second, just look at this. Look how thin it is, right? This is easy to pack in like a 72-hour kit, or in any bag, really, to grab something and, just go with it. The other reasons why I like something like this is that it's so easy to prepare. And, like, for example, this is rice and chicken, and it's got 500 calories in this one bag. So, and there's all different, kind of flavors, all different kind of brands. I'm just showing you what I use because, you basically try different things out. And then when you find one that I like this because it tastes good to me. And like I said, it's so easy. You just, it's perforated here. So you just rip this off. And then there's this little oxygen packet that you find inside. So this is what keeps it fresh for 30 years. So you take that out, you pour in hot water, and then it's got this, well, it's kind of hard to see it on the thing, but if you can see the kind of ridges here, it's got like a Ziploc seal there where you can just you seal the bag. So you put the hot water in, stir it up, seal the bag, wait for 5 minutes, open it up, stir everything back up, seal it back up, another 5 minutes, open it up, and you've got a nice, warm, nutritious meal right there instantly, right? So it's like super convenient. And like I said, it's just really easy. And so for something like an emergency situation, it's the kind of thing that I want to have on hand. So, now I have canned goods and, you know, extra stuff like pasta and rice and, all that kind of stuff. So I have that stuff too. But, um, for those of us who are single, let me tell you, as a single adult, this really, really helps out. Now, it's a little bit pricey. And that's quite a bit more pricey, actually. I mean, because there are a whole lot of like different storage options that you can buy. All different kinds of companies are selling that kind of stuff. Um, so you can just take your pick with what you wanna do with it. But for those of us who are single, I think it's an option worth considering. And certainly I've made it a part of my food storage supply and answer, right? So it's just you go get stuff from the store and you just buy a little more. And eventually you work your way up to where you can actually have a little bit of a storehouse. And ideally, you want to have a storehouse not just for yourself, but for people that are going to be around you, so you can help them out as well. Now, I understand, economics being what they are today, inflation's rampant. I don't think it's coming down anytime soon. So, you know, looking back at what general authorities have said, I went back to a previous time when inflation was running rampant. And I found this wonderful, wonderful address from President Benson, who at the time was Elder Ezra Taft Benson. No, actually, he was President Benson because I think he was the president of the, yeah, he was president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles at that time. So October of 1980. Okay. So this is just before the election of Ronald Reagan. And it wasn't until a couple of years after he had been in office that the economy began really turning around and they got inflation tapped down and things started to really boom with the economy. So it took some time to repair all the damage that had been done in the economy. But so in October 1980, people were really living in the midst of it. And I find it interesting. Another address from an October conference, October 1980, because Elder Bednar was speaking in October 2020. Here's October of 1980. So like 44 years ago. But when you listen to what he's had to say, it's fascinating. And it's just the part that makes it fascinating to me is that he's actually like, it sounds like he's talking about today, but he's talking about like 44 years ago. It's amazing. So I have some clips here, and one of the things I noticed is that the transcript that you see there on the church website doesn't quite match what he's actually saying at the pulpit. So, in addition to filling in the little end parts that aren't playing, I'm going to be filling in some of the stuff that he says that you don't hear on the, you're not going to hear on the video clips, which is why I recommend go back and read the whole thing. It's absolutely amazing. So let's start with this first one here.
Over 40 years, in a spirit of love, members of the church have been counseled to be thrifty, self-reliant, avoid debt, pay tithes and generous fast offerings, be industrious, and have sufficient food, clothing, and fuel on hand to last at least 1 year.
Okay, so this is interesting. 40 years ago, he's been saying for the last 40 years, the church has been saying this stuff. So this just really emphasizes what Elder Bednar was saying. It's like, what more do we need to say? We've been saying you need to pay attention to this So pay attention. This will play.
Today, there are compelling reasons to re-emphasize this counsel. We heard it done effectively in that great welfare meeting this morning. May I add just a word? Members of the church are feeling the economic pinch of higher taxes and inflation, coupled with conditions of continuing recession. Some have come to their bishops seeking assistance to make house payments, car loans, and utilities. Unfortunately, there has been fostered in the minds of some an expectation that when we experience hard times, when we have been unwise and extravagant with our resources and have lived beyond our means, we should look to either the church or government to bail us out. Forgotten by some of our members is an underlying principle of the church welfare plan that, quote, no true Latter-day Saint will, while physically able,
Okay, so it's freaking out again. So he's saying no true Latter-day Saint will, while physically able, voluntarily shift from himself the burden of his own support. Oh, there he goes. Okay, I don't know what's going on with this, but okay, we're just gonna move on. So, no true Latter-day Saint will, let someone else do for him or her what he or she can do for him or herself. It's basically what he's saying. That's the principle. I just find it interesting how, it's just so apropos. We see the same things, see the exact same things going on today. And it's like, so what's changed? Not a whole lot. So it's not just people being the same, but, the propensity for things to really go, awry for, any one particular person. You never know what's going to happen. I can remember when I got laid off from my job. And I certainly did not see it coming. I did not see it coming. I can remember when I was in graduate school, that summer in between, I graduated with my first undergraduate degrees, and before I was starting the semester with grad school, that summer, there was a snafu with the accounting, and I wasn't getting any money and put in my bank account like I was supposed to. So, if I hadn't, had a little bit of food saved up and knew how to use it, I really would have been hurting more than I was. But, thankfully, it don't take much to make biscuits and gravy, and I love biscuits and gravy. So I ate biscuits and gravy a lot that summer. It was great. But I mean, these are the kind of things that we need to think about, So, and again, one of the reasons why like this, no cooking involved, people. You just pour in hot water and there it is. You don't even need hot water, right? Like you use the hot water, it takes 10 minutes to be done. If you use cold water, it'll still come out. You just have to let it set longer. It's the heat that speeds up the reaction of rehydration. So if you, just have cold water, it'll still work. You just have to wait longer for it to get done, So we need to be thinking about these things, and there are different options that people can use to approach it. You just have to figure out, which one is the right one for you. Okay. Let's see if we can hear more from President Benson here.
More than even before, we need to learn and apply the principles of economic self-reliance. We do not know when a crisis involving sickness or unemployment may affect our circumstances. We do know that the Lord has decreed global calamities for the future and has warned and forewarned us to be prepared. For this reason, the brethren have repeatedly stressed a back to basics program for temporal and spiritual welfare. Today, I emphasize the most basic principle: home production and storage. Have you ever paused to realize what would happen to your community or our nation if transportation was paralyzed? Or if we had war or depression?
Actually, we don't have to, we don't have to pause to realize it. We already do realize it, right? We had COVID. Now granted, there was, it wasn't like, we were prevented from getting food during COVID. People still went to the grocery store, but we all saw how very fragile the supply lines were. And, the point he's making here is just that. It's like we're all dependent on these supply chains that are just so fragile. And if that were to go out, how would you eat? It's one thing to like be sitting there during the pandemic, like I was, and saying, okay, I want to minimize my time in the store so that I, reduce my probability of getting the COVID virus. So, I was planning my route and being very meticulous with, the things that were on my list and planning the route in the store. So I just get the first item on the list, boom, get the second item on the list, boom, get the third item, boom, and just move through. But what if what if the store didn't have anything? I remember once when I lived in South Carolina, there was this huge ice storm that was coming through. And of course, that part of the South, people aren't, really that adept. People who are from that area are not really adept at driving on snow and ice. I'm an Idaho boy. It's like, I know about this stuff. So I wasn't freaking out over anything. And I remember waking up, that morning and just going to work. Most people called in sick, even though they weren't really sick. And it was great. It was snow and ice on the road, but nobody else there on the road. So I was handling it okay. And I even stopped by Chick-fil-A on my way in. And as I got into the office there, I was working on the second floor of the building. And my boss's boss, who also worked on the second floor of the building, he happened to be there at the same time I was, caught the elevator with me. He sees now this guy's from England, right? He sees my Chick-fil-A bag and he looked at me, he's like, "You're eating chicken for breakfast?" And I looked at him and said, "Don't tell me you've never had one of their chicken biscuits." And he's like, "No, actually I haven't." It's like, "Oh, you haven't lived, man. You need to go get one of these." I don't know if he thought I don't know if I had an influence in the lack of a raise that I found at my next performance for you. But yeah, I wasn't. But I can remember the stores. It took several days for the stores to get restocked because of course, the news weathermen for whatever channel people were watching, they're all saying the same thing. It's the apocalypse is upon us. That was their attitude toward it, and the stores were all cleaned out of bread, milk, grits, and staples. It's the South, right? So grits is a staple. All of the basic stuff was just all the shelves were bare. And I just come on, it's a little ice storm, but people weren't able to handle it. And President Benson is making the same claim here. What if something were to happen? The stores aren't gonna have much. The most any grocery store will be able to supply is going to be 3 days, and that's a stretch. That's a stretch because I can tell you a lot of the basic staple stuff, it's going to be gone within a day. So you really think about, look around the world around you, how chaotic everything is becoming. It's a lot more chaotic than it was back in 1980. And if this message was appropriate then, how much more appropriate is it now for us to look around and say, okay, we need to start thinking about how are we going to survive if the supply chains go down. If this will play.
How would you and your neighbors obtain food? How long would the corner grocery store?
Okay, so that's kind of linked up. But he's basically saying, how would you and your neighbors obtain food? How long would the corner grocery store supermarket sustain the needs of the community? And like I said, it at most 3 days, probably just one day, and then you're just picking stuff that people don't really buy that much, right? So again, you really need to be looking out. The thing I really liked about President Benson's remarks here is that, back after World War II, he was charged with given a special assignment by the first presidency to go and distribute food to all of the saints that were in Europe post World War II. And he was actually distributing food not just to members of the church, but to a lot of other people there as well. And so he talks in his address here about those experiences that he had. Let's see if we can get this to play.
Shortly after World War II, I was called with the first presidency to go to Europe to reestablish our missions and set up a program for the distribution of food and clothing to the saints. Vivid in my memory are the people who got on trains each morning with all kinds of bric-a-brac in their arms to go out to the countryside to trade their possessions for food. At even time, the train station was filled with people with arms full of vegetables and fruits and a menagerie of squealing pigs and chickens. You never heard such a commotion. These people were, of course, willing to barter practically anything for that commodity which sustains life, food. An almost forgotten means of economic self-reliance is the home production of food. We are too accustomed to going to stores and purchasing what we need. By producing some of our food, we reduce to a great extent the impact of inflation on our money. More importantly, we learn how to produce our own food and involve all family members in a beneficial project. No more timely counsel, I feel, has been given by President Kimball than his repeated emphasis to grow our own gardens. Here is one sample of his emphasis over the past 7 years. Quote, "We encourage you to grow all the food that you possibly can on your own property. Berry bushes, grapevines, fruit trees. Plant them if your climate is right. Grow vegetables and eat them from your own yard." Many of you have listened to and done as President Kimball has counseled, and you have been blessed for it. Others have rationalized that they had no time or space. May I suggest that you do what others have done? Get together with several others and seek permission to use a vacant lot for a garden or a plot of ground and grow your gardens. Some else.
Okay, so this is it's kind of getting choppy there at the end, but he's saying get together with others and seek permission to use a vacant lot for a garden, or rent a plot of ground and grow your gardens. Some elders' quorums have done this as a quorum, and all who have participated have reaped the benefits of a vegetable and fruit harvest and the blessings of cooperation and family involvement. Many families have dug up lawn spaces for gardens. I think this is a point worth considering that may be a part of your solution to this idea of food storage is to get, um, get a way to grow some of your own food, and I wouldn't just brush this off. Um, I actually had a conversation with somebody there at that DC conference about, you know, um, she was talking about how she was thinking about growing her own food. And I encouraged her in that direction. I said, when you think about what's going on in the world today, it makes a lot of sense to have your own source of food that you're only producing yourself. And you're not so dependent upon, the supply chains or whatnot. And, she was wondering about whether or not she should do it, but, Spirit was there in our conversation and she recognized it and said, I appreciate our conversation because I got the confirmation that this is something I need to do. I think that's something that a lot of us singles need to think about as we look and prepare for our own situations, not only to help ourselves, but to help those around us. And not think about depend on some other larger entity to bail us out. I think part of being self-reliant is putting in place the structures and the resources so that, we can rely on what we have done for ourselves. So President Benson, when it goes and starts talking about some of the things the Lord has said about being prepared. Let's see if we can get this to play right.
Encourage you to be more self-reliant, because the Lord has declared, notwithstanding the tribulation which shall descend upon you, that the church may stand independent above all other creatures beneath the celestial kingdom. The Lord wants us to be independent and self-reliant, because these will be days of tribulation.
It's not. Yeah, it looks like it's not. It's not coming in. So he says, the Lord wants us to be independent and self-reliant because these will be days of tribulation. He has warned and forewarned us of the eventuality. And then there's this next part that's not in the audio, but is in the written transcript of the address. It says President Brigham Young said, "If you are without bread, how much wisdom can you boast? And of what real utility are your talents if you cannot procure for yourselves and save against the day of scarcity those substances designed to sustain your natural lives?" In other words, you may have all the talent in the world, but that talent isn't going to help you or anyone else if you're dead. Think about this now. It behooves us to really look at, what we can do to prepare. Um, I got three more quotes from this talk from President Benson, but I'm just gonna read through what he had to say here. So, because I think it'll go quicker and it won't be as choppy as I got to get these tech problems figured out. Anyway, so in the next quote, President Benson quotes Elder Harold B. Lee as saying, quote, "Perhaps if we think not in terms of a year's supply of what we ordinarily would use, and think more in terms of what it would take to keep us alive in case we didn't have anything else to eat, that last would be very easy to put in storage for a year, just enough to keep us alive if we didn't have anything else to eat. We wouldn't get fat on it, but we would live. And if you think in terms of that kind of annual storage rather than a whole year's supply of everything you are accustomed to eat, which in most cases is utterly impossible for the average family, I think we will come nearer to what President J. Reuben Clark Jr. advised us way back in 1937. And then President Benson goes on to say, there are blessings in being close to the soil and raising your own food, even if it is only a garden in your yard and a fruit tree or two. Those families will be fortunate who, in the last days, have an adequate supply of food because of their foresight and ability to produce their own. So I think we need to think in terms of not just, food that we store up, which that's what is some of what I do, right? This is good, but I think we also need to think in terms of producing our own food. What food can we actually produce? And again, I think this counsel from President Lee, who at the time was Elder Lee, I think this is spot on. Don't think of getting everything all at once. Just get a little bit here, a little bit there, and just augment stuff and focus on survival. Right? I mean, you're not trying. The idea is not to live like a king off of your food storage. The idea is to survive. Right? Like he says, you're not going to get fat on it, but you would live. You want something that keeps you alive. So I think those principles to keep in mind as we craft our own individual response to emergency preparedness is going to be really spot on. President Benson said, you do not need to go into debt, may I add, to obtain a year's supply. Plan to build up your food supply just as you would a savings account. Save a little for storage each paycheck. Can or bottle fruit and vegetables from your gardens and orchards. Learn how to preserve food through drying and possibly freezing. Make your storage a part of your budget. Store seeds and have sufficient tools on hand to do the job. If you are saving and planning for a second car or a TV set or some item which merely adds to your comfort or pleasure, you may need to change your priorities. We urge you to do this perfectly and do it now. Do it now. And I can hear that expression in my mind from President Kimball. Do it right now. I think that applies to emergency preparedness for us. As we look ahead, there's so much, like I said, so much chaos in the world today. I'm not saying anything's going to happen. I hope that nothing untoward does happen. I want peace and prosperity for everyone, but unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. And so we need to be prepared for what might happen. The last quote I have from President Benson is a little lengthy, but we'll see if we can. I'm just going to go ahead and read this because I think it'll be easier for us to get through if I just read it. And this really clinches it. This is a little long, but it really clenches it for me. And maybe it will for you too. He said, I speak with a feeling of great urgency. I have seen what the days of tribulation can do to people. I have seen hunger stalk the streets of Europe. I've witnessed the appalling emaciated shadows of human figures. I have seen women and children scavenge army garbage dumps for scraps of food. Those scenes and nameless faces cannot be erased from my memory. I shall never forget the saints of Hamburg who appeared on the verge of collapse from starvation, or their small children whom I invited to come to the stand as we emptied our pockets of edibles. Most had never seen these items before because of the wartime conditions. Nor can I forget the expectant and nursing mothers whose eyes watered with tears when we gave them each an orange. We saw the terrible physical and social side effects of hunger and malnutrition. One sister walked over 1,000 miles with 4 small children, leaving her home in Poland. She lost all 4 to starvation in the freezing conditions, yet she stood before us in her emaciated condition, her clothing shredded and her feet wrapped in burlap, and bore testimony of how blessed she was. I cannot forget the French saints who, unable to obtain bread, used potato peelings for the emblems of the sacrament. Nor will I ever forget the faith of the Dutch saints who accepted our suggestion to grow potatoes to alleviate their own starving conditions, and then sent a portion of their first harvest to the German people who had been their bitter enemies. The following year, they sent them the entire harvest. The annals of church history have seldom recorded a more Christ-like act of love and compassion. Too often, we bask in our comfortable complacency and rationalize that the ravages of war, economic disaster, famine, and earthquake cannot happen here. Those who believe this are either not acquainted with the revelations of the Lord or they do not believe them. Those who smugly think these calamities will not happen, that they somehow will be set aside because of the righteousness of the saints, are deceived and will rue the day they harbored such a delusion. The Lord has warned and forewarned us against the day of great tribulation and given us counsel through his servants on how we can be prepared for these difficult times. Have we heeded his counsel? Indeed, have we heeded his counsel? Um, you know, you could say, what you will, but, at the end of the day, you either have something or you don't. And I think, I think this is a timely reminder for us, right? And those of us, you know, um, you're hearing this message, you likely remember the pandemic from not that long ago. I mean, here we are in 2024, so it's like 4 years ago. And though a lot of things, with like supply chains and whatnot have returned to more or less normal, there's still some issues. And, we remember what it was like to have, our freedoms curtailed and to have restrictions placed on, what we could actually get. We saw how fragile the supply chains are. And, I think that's a warning sign, just like, Elder Bednar was, he said in his conference talk in October of 2020, he surveilled his readiness and found that in some ways he was properly prepared, and in other ways he could have done more. I think it behooves all of us, as we see the chaos growing in the world today, it behooves all of us to just sit down and say, okay, what can we do? And, that's why I recommended that webpage on the church website, because it takes you through like resources. There's like checklists, different ideas for you to consider, things that you might need to prepare for. So there's the food that's obviously we've been talking about. I think you should have some cash on hand. Again, I'm not saying anything is going to happen, but last year there was a surprising number, an increase in bank failures, and who knows what's going to happen. Some people just kind of shrug their things, saying, "Well, we've got the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the government entity that's supposed to cover your deposits in your bank account. If anything happens, so your deposits up to $250,000 are supposed to be covered, but the FDIC is largely insolvent." And, there's some people saying that, the actual money that they have on hand can only cover about less than 1%, like 0.74% of, all the deposits. If the banking system were to collapse, they could only cover less than 1% of all the deposits that they're supposed to be covering. So I think you need to have some cash on hand. Don't say that, well, it's in the bank and I'm not going to spend it. Have the cash on hand and put it in a safe place that only you have access to. And I think that's another part of emergency preparedness. And if you're not able to, if things are so tight that you can't actually spare what you can, even if it's just pennies, spare what you can. And then go back to that previous episode of JJRadio where we talked about ways to increase your income. Many of us have an income problem, right? So what can you do to make a little bit more money that you can bring in to serve as this, this buffer that you need to, support all of these efforts for emergency preparedness? If you're finding things are a little tight, then maybe you need to pick something a little bit up on the side somehow to bring in a little bit more money so that you can save up a little bit of cash that you keep aside, and then purchase your food storage, your water, your other supplies, and just start building that up. I think that's something that a lot of us should really pay attention to. I had another conference to talk that I wanted to go through, in addition to President Benson, which again, you need to go back and read that, October of 1980, Saturday afternoon session, which strangely enough, Elder Bednar was talking in the Saturday afternoon session of October 2020. So I'm like, there's some weird parallels here. Am I supposed to read into that or something? I don't know. Here's a talk from President Hinckley, okay, from 2001. Again, October General Conference, not the Saturday afternoon session. This was during the priesthood session. So this was later that night on Saturday. But October of 2001. So, the tragedy that was 9/11 had just occurred a couple of weeks prior to the conference. So it was fresh on everybody's minds. And he had quite a few things to say about a whole lot of things. But a lot of his talk was about, of course, the event of 9/11, because it was fresh on everyone's minds. But he also had some words to say about emergency preparedness. Let's see if I can get this. See if I can get this quote to come up here. Let's try this.
Occasions of this kind pull us up sharply to a realization that life is fragile, peace is fragile, civilization itself is fragile. The economy is particularly vulnerable. We have been counseled again and again concerning self-reliance, concerning debt, concerning thrift. So many of our people are heavily in debt for things that are not entirely necessary. When I was a young man, my father counseled me to build a modest home.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there. I found it interesting that notice how President Benson, 1980, was talking about, hey, if you're spending money on all of these luxury items that maybe you don't need, you need to re-examine your priorities and get on this emergency preparedness bandwagon. And here we find, over 20 years later, President Hinckley saying essentially the same thing. If you look at where you're putting your money, and if maybe what you need to do is not find an extra source of income. Maybe you need to stop spending your money on something that isn't going to be as important as actually having the resources you need to weather some unforeseen storm in the future. Just something to think about.
Sufficient for the needs of my family, and make it beautiful and attractive and pleasant and secure. He counseled me to pay off the mortgage as quickly as I could, so that come what may, there would be a roof over the heads of my wife and children. I was reared on that kind of doctrine. I urge you as members of this church to get free of debt where possible, and to have a little laid aside against a rainy day. We cannot provide against every contingency, but we can provide against many contingencies. Let the
Okay, and there it's going again. So he's saying we cannot provide against every contingency. We can provide against many contingencies. Let the present situation remind us that this we should do. and the present situation, as I said before, he's delivering these remarks 2 weeks after 9/11. So, part of the reason why he's talking about emergency preparedness in this address is because, the economy was not that great in September 2001. And, after the attacks on 9/11, the economy really took a dive, and there were a lot of people who lost their jobs. And, there among those people were Latter-day Saints who had not heeded the words of the prophets to, store up food, water, all that stuff. And suddenly they were in a situation where, they were hurting. They were really hurting, and so this is part of the reason why he's actually addressing this topic in his talk, because he's trying to help people wake up and say, you need to be ready for contingencies that are going to be coming. I got let's see, 3 more quotes from President Hinckley. I'm gonna quit trying to play the video because it's just, I got to get the tech people. I really got to start jumping on them and get them going with this. So here, his next quote, he says, "I do not know what the future holds. I do not wish to sound negative, but I wish to remind you of the warnings of Scripture and the teachings of the prophets which we have had constantly before us. I cannot forget the great lesson of Pharaoh's dream of the fat and lean kine and of the full and withered stalks of corn. I cannot dismiss from my mind the grim warnings of the Lord as set forth in the 24th chapter of Matthew. I am familiar, as are you, with the declarations of modern revelation that the time will come when the earth will be cleansed, and there will be indescribable distress with weeping and mourning and lamentation. Now, I do not wish to be an alarmist. I do not wish to be a prophet of doom. I am optimistic. I do not believe the time is here when an all-consuming calamity will overtake us." And of course, that was actually pretty spot on, right? COVID hadn't yet come. It wasn't yet 2020. It was still 2001. So I'm with you there. I'm with you there, Gordy. He goes on and says, "I earnestly pray that it may not, but there's so much of the Lord's work yet to be done. We and our children after us must do it." I still think there's a lot of the Lord's work that has yet to be done. And so he'll support us, but how are we going to do that work if we're too busy looking for our next meal? One of the things I learned from being on my mission in Guatemala, being the impoverished country that it was, and in many ways still is, when you're trying to teach a hungry person the gospel, it's really difficult because their mind is so much on where am I going to get my next meal from that they can't really think about anything else. And, this goes back to the quote that I was sharing previously from Brigham Young, where President Benson, in President Benson's address, there's the quote from Brigham Young, all the talents that you have, all the good that you can do for other people is not going to mean anything if you're dead. You have to be able to survive. You have to be able to find a way to make stuff go with it. So I think this is something that we need to think about. Something else that we need to think about when we're talking about emergency preparedness is tithing. And President Hinckley gets into that. There he says, "How grateful I am for the law of tithing. It is the Lord's law of finance. It is set forth in a few words in the 119th section of the Doctrine and Covenants. It comes of his wisdom. To every man and woman, to every boy and girl, to every child in this church who pays an honest tithing, be it large or small, I express gratitude for the faith that is in your hearts. I remind you, and those who do not pay tithing, but who should, that the Lord has promised marvelous blessings. He has also promised that he that is tithed shall not be burned at his coming." I think one of the most important things we can do to prepare for whatever emergency may be coming down the road that we can't foresee is to pay the tithing, because there is that promise that, we'll be provided for somehow. The Lord will provide for us somehow if we pay our tithing. So if you're not paying your tithing, then you might want to take a look at that. I think that should take the first priority over any other things that we've talked about today. That needs to come first. And then this last quote from President Hinckley, let me just read it really quick. It says, "Now, brothers and sisters, we must do our duty, whatever that duty might be. Peace may be denied for a season. Some of our liberties may be curtailed. We may be inconvenienced. We may even be called on to suffer in one way or another." Sounds like he's talking about COVID, but no, he's talking about the days following 9/11. I mean, this is 2 weeks after the attacks in New York and the Pentagon in DC. So, and at that time there was a lot of unknowns about what's going to happen, what does the future hold. But the language he's using, man, he could have been talking about COVID 2020. But God, our eternal Father, will watch over this nation and all of the civilized world who look to him. He has declared, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." Our safety lies in repentance. Our strength comes of obedience to the commandments of God. I think that's another key element as we think about our approach to emergency preparedness. That as single adults, we may not all have the same approach to how we prepare for an upcoming crisis, but I think what President Hinckley here is saying is right on. Our safety lies in repentance. Our strength comes of obedience to the commandments of God. So if there's something you need to do to get right with God, then I suggest you get on that. Because just what it says here, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord." And with all the problems that we're having in our country, I think a lot of those problems are coming because our society has turned farther and farther away from him. And so, with the chaos that's coming, I think one of the best defenses that we're going to have with all the problems that are likely to happen, we gotta have that spiritual safety net from being close to the Lord. So I think we need to consider that. President Hinckley said, "Let us be prayerful. Let us pray for righteousness. Let us pray for the forces of good. Let us reach out to help men and women of goodwill, whatever their religious persuasion and wherever they live. Let us stand firm against evil, both at home and abroad. Let us live worthy of the blessings of heaven, reforming our lives where necessary, and looking to him, the Father of us all. He has said, 'Be still and know that I am God.'" I thought that was like, whoa, that's like almost prophetic, because here we go again. Yeah, that was almost prophetic because, next week for, that next episode of JJRadio, we're going to go back to conference. And we're going to look at Elder Bednar's conference address from this last conference, where he talked about the importance of being still. And he takes that quote there from Psalms, "Be still and know that I am God." And so we're going to be diving into that as well next week. So hang on for that. Speaking of which, I've been working on this whole thing about bringing people into the program. May have some people show up next week. So, stay tuned for that. Final word from President Hinckley. "Are these perilous times? They are, but there is no need to fear. We can have peace in our hearts and peace in our homes. We can be an influence for good in this world, every one of us." I just think that's so, this is so apropos. And so hopefully, I've given you some things that that can help you think about your approach to emergency preparedness and preparing for what might come. Again, I'm not saying anything will come. I'm not predicting that. The Lord's already made the prediction that we're living in calamitous times. And so I think if we really believe the Lord and we're going to listen to him, we're going to get ready for what might be. I'm not saying anything will happen. I'm just saying things might happen, and it's better to be prepared and have nothing happen, which is what I hope for every one of us. I hope that, we get prepared and nothing happens, and we find that preparations are not needed. And that's a much better situation to be in than to be in the opposite situation, which is something happens and you're not ready. So I think we need to just take a step back and, take some time this weekend to step back and just assess, how am I doing with my emergency preparedness? Where am I at? And what can I do to do better with that? Consider not just the temporal aspects we talked about, but also the spiritual. If you're not paying tithing, start paying tithing, right? Start paying tithing and get the blessings that come from paying tithing. If you find that you need to come closer to the Lord in some other way, make a concerted effort to pay attention to that, and to take care of that. So that's basically the program today. Don't have any comments to share from people, but I did want to talk a little bit about the conference that we had in DC this past weekend, and there was like some 320 something people around there that were actually there at the conference. I'm sure that many of those people were from the local mid-singles ward, there in the DC area, but they actually had a map there in the lobby where, the building where we were holding the conference. And I got to tell you, people were putting pens up for where they're from. There were people from all over the country. I was surprised to see, I wasn't surprised to see people up and down the East Coast. That didn't surprise me. What surprised me was people coming from out west, people coming from Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, people from Idaho. I was surprised to see people. I met a couple of people. One was from Twin, and the other was from Meridian. Actually, they're in Treasure Valley. That's where my father lives. So I was surprised to see, people coming out. People came out from Portland, Seattle. There's some folks from California. People were really coming from all over the country. Because there were some other people coming from the Midwest, from the Plains, from Texas. So it wasn't just the East Coast. It was people from all over. So it was very well attended in that regard. The speakers that were there giving the workshops or presentations or whatever you want to call them, they're all delivering very good information. The only thing I think that could have been improved with that would be twofold. First, everyone that was talking to people is like married, and it always makes me like a little nervous, for lack of a better word. When I go to these events and I hear married people talking to singles. In a lot of instances, I've noticed that there tends to be this feeling of the married people are talking down to the singles. I did not get that feeling at all with any of the, speakers or presentations that I attended at this conference. Not at all. But I still think it would be helpful if, in the introductions of these people, that they list not just, this person's been married for so many years and they have, this number of children and this number of grandchildren, because this is the thing we idolize in the culture, right? But when your audience is a bunch of single people, I think it's really important to add into the intro, and this is when that person got married. Like you were how old when you got married to your present day companion? How old were you? Were you ever divorced? How long were you divorced? I mean, these sorts of things I think are important at a singles conference because they help establish a larger sense of authenticity. I think it's important for the singles to know that they feel understood. And part of what helps them to feel understood is listening to people who have actually been through what they have been through. I think a lot of us who are single will agree that if you haven't experienced it, you don't really understand what it is we're experiencing. And so I think having that little piece of information in the introduction, I think that would be helpful. If you disagree with that, then hey, there's space down below for you to comment and provide your reasoning for that. Why do you think it's not? Why do you think it's not important? I think it is important, and I wish that more. I wish that more of the introductions had that information. So yeah, I would say that. And then the other thing that I think would improve things is there needs to be some sort of workshop about how to get the most out of the relationships that you have there at the conference, right? Because one of the things that a lot of people, admittedly, a lot of people, most people are gonna, they harbor some hope of finding their eternal companion. Oh, we got that, right? But I think there's a larger role that these conferences can play in helping to establish social connections. But I don't know that a lot of people that attend these conferences actually have the skill set and the knowledge developed to get beyond the superficial. And certainly, in the conversations, and there was plenty of room for conversations and socializing. Don't get me wrong, and I thought that was fantastic. At the same time, I wondered what benefit is this really providing to people? Because a lot of the conversations that I was hearing were really superficial. Um, you expect conversations on the order of, well, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do for work? These types of things, when you just first meet somebody, are typical and expected. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing that at all. But most of the conversations that I was listening in on, they didn't get far beyond that. And so, and people just kind of part ways, and there's no exchange of information. There's no way for people to carry on the relationship that just got started with people. Granted, for like 99% of these relationships are probably just going to be friendships. But shouldn't that carry on after the conference? Shouldn't that be part of the benefit of actually going to one of these conferences, that you're able to build the support network that you need? Because I got to tell you, quite frankly, a lot of us that, we're just going to, your traditional geographic wards and stakes. A lot of the singles groups that are in that situation, the leadership has no vision of providing a support network for singles, right? It just kind of made me cringe, when I hear people get up at the pulpit during this conference and talk about how they were so thankful for the community that they had. And I'm just like, you're obviously a member of the mid-singles ward, because I don't feel any sense of community among singles in my stake. I don't think I ever have, because they just don't have the vision of they don't have the vision of providing support. All they do is just put on a bunch of activities and say, well, if you want to attend, here you go. And then we're left to fend for ourselves. And, if there were some kind of workshop on, okay, how do we take the people that we just meet and kind of extend that beyond, for those who may be interested in doing that, um, I think that kind of information would be very, very helpful to a lot of people, because otherwise it's just, you leave your traditional, stake that's not really providing you the support that you need. And then you come to this conference, you have a great weekend, and then you go back to what you had before. So really, what have you done? What has been accomplished? We just had a great weekend. I think more can be done to um, to help singles actually take something home with them, so that things can actually be changed. Um, so I mean, yeah. So I mean, the conference was actually really good. The only other sore spot I had with the conference was the gala. There was like a dance party that was held at the Library of Congress. Now, I gotta tell you, as a bibliophile, like, that's somebody who loves books, loves being surrounded by books. having that type of event at, what is ostensibly the world's largest library, right? The mecca of bibliophiles the world over, and you're having an event there. It's like, yeah, you more than piqued my interest. But there was no, we were all left to our own devices. We're all left to our own devices for dinner before the event, and they're all left to our own devices to actually get down there. And again, this goes back to my earlier point about how, people in these traditional awards and stakes don't have the support system that we need. I actually saw there on the Facebook group for singles in my own stake where I live, there was an announcement about the reminder announcement about, hey, the conference. And I put a comment there that said, hey, is anyone going to this? Because I hadn't heard about anybody going to this. And I actually saw people from my stake who were actually there at the conference. And I'm thinking to myself, why didn't we carpool? Why didn't we come here together? Couldn't there have been some effort to say, okay, who's actually going and what can we do to say, okay, we've got our group together. Can we negotiate with a local hotel for a lower rate? What funds can be provided from the stake to help the singles, take care of that lodging and transportation need? Can we carpool with one another? It's fine for the conference organizers, I think, to say you're on your own for dinner on Saturday night, and then there's the gala at the library. I don't have any problem with that. What I have a problem with is that you're leaving people to fend for themselves when these people don't have the actual support structures that you're used to having in your mid-singles ward. And you tell them you're on your own. Well, for me, being on my own meant being just that. I was on my own. And although I tried to get, into a group of other people with dinner, it didn't pan out. And then I was looking at, okay, so how am I going to get down there? And it's like, well, parking, that's like anywhere nearby the Library of Congress didn't look like that was a real option for me. So I was like, okay, can I take the metro? And then seeing where the metro stop was with respect to where the Library of Congress was, and thinking, I don't really feel good walking alone at night in downtown Washington, D.C. So I ended up not going. That was a real disappointment for me. But I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. I think more needs to be done. And it doesn't necessarily need to come from the conference providers, but I think if the people who are organizing the conference aren't going to be providing us support, then they need to be pushing the individual stakes for the people that are actually going to the conference and say, hey, you need to get with your stake leaders and make arrangements to take care of that. There needs to be more of a recognition, I think, that a lot of people that are coming to this event, they don't have the support systems. The people that are organizing this event are clearly in that mid-singles unit. And, there's some built-in support with that, I'm sure, which is why, I heard people getting up the pulpit being thankful for the sense of community. But even then, I think what's really going on with that, though, is these are people who are saying that their needs are being met. Because I've been in mid-singles ward when I was in Seattle, and I didn't think my needs were being met. I just, I've never really felt a sense of community from being single. I mean, that ended when I stopped attending the student ward, back in my undergraduate days. And I still, I stayed for a master's degree, so I was still attending the student ward. But once I graduated and moved on out of that town, I've never felt any sense of community with any singles group that I've been in. And that's just my reality that I've gotten used to. And I think, those of us who are planning these activities, especially conferences that are bringing in people from other stakes, I think we need to be more aware that not everyone has that support system. And if there's something that can be done to help and alleviate and be at least conscious of that, I think that's something well worth considering. The events on Sunday were fantastic. I especially appreciated the the informal get together there on Sunday evening. It was clear that a lot of people that were there were just they're part of the local singles unit, so they kind of knew each other. They're kind of comfortable with each other, but it was nice to get together. I had the discussion group I thought was really spot on. I kept having to hold myself back because I'm like, I've been talking about singles issues for years, right? So I kind of want to just sit back and listen to what other people have to say. And I said a few things. I could have said more. I really want to say a lot more than I did. But again, I thought it would be more prudent to just sit back and let other people talk and just to get more of their perspective and what's on their mind. So yeah, overall, I think it was a great event. I think it was worth attending. I think there's some things in which it could be improved. But there's my piece on that. So yeah, that's all I got for you this week, peeps. So thank you all for watching. I hope that I was able to offer you something beneficial. If not, then come back next week and maybe we'll have better luck then. So until next week, don't forget, between now and next week, actually don't just consume content, right? Actually take this and put this in, because that's what this is all about, right? I want you to thrive in your single years. And part of thriving, I think, is being ready for an emergency that might happen that you don't foresee. I think that's a part of thriving. So be sure you sit down and actually consider, and if you make it a matter of prayer, partner with the Lord, ask him, what do I really need to focus on with emergency preparedness, and let him guide you to what you need. And one thing I did learn actually preparing for all of this stuff was each ward and stake should have an emergency preparedness plan. And so I'm planning on asking my bishop, because I don't know anything about a ward emergency plan. It's like, say, hey, does our ward have an emergency plan? So if you're curious about that, go ask your bishop. And maybe you can do good in this area by being the spark that lights the fire that gets, your ward emergency plan underway. Again, there's resources there on the church website for all of that. So, yeah, let's all get on this bandwagon and start believing the Lord when he says, hey, there's hard times coming. There's calamities coming to the earth. So let's get ready for what might be. The same thing will happen, just saying it might happen. So hope you get something out of the program today. Come back next week with the wonderful, splendiferous, joyous episode of Join the Journey. And, until then, this is your host reminding you there is joy to be had all along your journey. So take that joy, journey on.